Welcome, everyone. I'm Susan Copley. I'm the rector here at Christ Church, and it is my privilege that we could invite Bishop Harris to be with us today. We called the afternoon Witness to History and Maker of History. And as I was looking through some of the things that you have been a part of, I realized that a lot of the things that are so well known even happened before you were bishop. They happened when you were a layperson. And I want to say that out loud because I know that most of the people in this room are laity. And that witness to a deep faith that takes action, that raised in a church, working in the business world, even before entering ordination, and that active life, standing up for justice, was one that happened even before ordination. And of course, being ordained then and being consecrated as the first woman bishop, I mean, all of us here are so grateful. I have to tell just a little story that I just heard this weekend. A bunch of women were together, and one of them talked about their grandchildren and how they wanted to play church. And there were some boys and girls, and as they were playing church, the little boy said, "Well, I want to be the priest." And the little girl said, "You can't, you're a boy." We've come a long way. I thought that was just great. Well, we know boys, you can be priests too. And we're very grateful. And so our hope today too is not only that we hear stories of what's happened in the past and hear Bishop's wisdom to us of what's happening now, that we're just not listening to stories, but that we come away ourselves empowered to be witnesses of history and makers of history. That's what we're called to. I do want to thank Nancy Bryan and Vern Becker and Owen Thompson. Owen is the priest at Church Nyack, and we collaborated on this together so that we could bring Bishop here. And if you want, tomorrow you are welcome to go and hear Bishop preach over in Nyack, at Grace Church Nyack. I won't be offended if you're not here at church to hear Bishop preach. And if you can't make church and want to just go to the afterwards, the conversation about 11:30. So, Bishop, we are grateful that you're here, and so welcome.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I'm really very happy to be here with you, and I hope you don't get bored by some of the stories that I will tell in response to some of your questions.
Boredom, I don't think, is the concern, right? We're going to start. I'm going to ask a few questions, and then we'll take some time for all of us. I think I've got it. Nope. I thought I set my phone here so I could keep track of time, which means I'm not, which means you're going to have to keep track of time for me. But we're going to start with some questions that I've prepared for Bishop Harris, and then I want to allow ample time for you to ask your questions of her as we all learn from the wisdom that she has to share. What we discovered as you and I and Frederica Harris Tomsett and Michael Curry, presiding bishop, sat down almost exactly a year ago, is that your strength and your courage did not spring as a surprise, that you come from a long line of strong women. Would you start us off by telling us some of the stories of your childhood and your early experiences and the people who shaped you into the strong woman you became?
Be happy to. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Well, one of the strong women in my background is my great-grandmother, who was a slave on a plantation in Maryland. And as a slave, her name was Adelaide Eliza. She was on the Bronner plantation, so she was Adelaide Eliza Bronner. But after emancipation, she changed her name to Ida. So she became Ida Brawner Assembly, and we called her Mom Sem. But as a young girl, about 12 or 13 years old, she had an encounter with General Grant, who came on the plantation and asked her to pump a dipper of water for him, which she did. Then he swished the water around in the dipper and threw it out and had her pump another dipper. And she said, you didn't need to throw it out, the dipper was clean. So he said, well, I don't know, people around here have been trying to poison me and my men. And then he did that thing that white people used to do and they still do to black people. He rubbed her head and said, I've been south fighting for little boys like you, because her hair was close cropped like mine. And she responded, I don't need anybody to fight for me. I can fight for myself, and I am not a little boy. So that's one person in my background. And her daughter, my grandmother, was equally as strong, as was my paternal grandmother, who was in an automobile accident in her later years and had several bones broken. And as she was about to leave the hospital, this young resident doctor held up the x-rays of her before and after pictures. And he said, look what we've done for you, Granny. And she said, no, you look what my God has done. And my mother, on the day of my consecration, when there were 2 objections offered at my consecration, I said to someone, keep your eye on my mother, because if she starts to pat her foot, somebody in here is going to be in big trouble, because she was at that age and stage where she thought she could say anything that was on her mind. But she got up from her seat and came across the aisle to me, took my wrist, looked me dead in the eye, and she said, have no fear. God is on our side, and everything is going to be all right. Then she looked me dead in the eye and said, this is your mama. And went back and sat down, and the rest of the service proceeded apace, and she behaved herself.
We could all use somebody to look us in the eye like that, right?
Can I add something?
Please?
I was there. I'm Vicky Sirota, and
Oh, yes.
I was ordained a deacon and you preached.
I cannot hear you.
Okay, I'm Vicky Sirota,
Yes.
and I was ordained in the Diocese of Massachusetts.
Yes.
And I was a deacon, and you preached at that. But I and my whole family were up in the balcony for your consecration. And we had no idea, we'd never been to a consecration before. So when there were objections, everybody in the balcony started screaming because we were so upset, and we thought it could actually stop the service, and that you wouldn't be consecrated. And then, of course, the presiding bishop took the 2 people that objected to a room in the back to figure out what the objections were.
Oh, no, they offered them right there.
Oh, okay. But what I remember is that we were yelled at. And I'll never forget that this was the process, and we were out of line, and I'll just never forget that. And then, of course, when it was okay, we were all just so incredibly joyful about
There
God.
was a young man there in the balcony who had come with a Roman Catholic priest. And when the objections started, he stood up and said, "Go home!"
Wow.
And of later, I was crossing the campus at Episcopal Divinity School in Cambridge. And this young man came up to me and said, "How are you?" And I said, "I'm fine." And I looked at him, and he said, "I'm Fred." I said, "Fred?" He said, "Go home." I said, "Oh, that Fred."
Well, then you came to St. Paul's in Dedham.
Yes.
And you were going to confirm, I was Lutheran, you confirmed me and my son Jonah. And he was sitting in a chair when you walked into the church, and he went crazy. And it was just such a sweet, sweet moment. It was just a month after you had been consecrated.
Well, I'm so delighted to see you.
And then 2 months later, you baptized my husband, Robert Sirota, who was born Jewish, and he was baptized Christian. You are our bishop, so God bless you.
I'm so delighted to see you. God bless you for being here. Yeah.
So you
Well-
complicated the order of my questions now. There's all sorts of things that I want us to talk about.
Well, let me tell you one little story. I visited a parish early in my episcopacy, and I had on my mitre. And this little boy said to his father, "Is she a pirate?" And his father said, "No." The little boy said, "Well, why is she wearing a pirate's hat?"
Okay, so you set the direction for me. I want to jump back to baptism, but I want to start at confirmation. And I want to start with the stories I've heard you tell about your practice with confirmands and how you developed.
Well, my confirmation was so awful that I try to make confirmation special for people. One, the bishop who confirmed me never came to black congregations on a Sunday. It was always a weeknight. So I was confirmed on Monday, December 11th, 1941. And this bishop was not a high churchman because the Diocese of Pennsylvania where I was confirmed was snake belly low. But he wore little white cotton gloves when he came to black congregations because he did not want to touch our heads. So it was not a sign of churchmanship, as I said. So I think one highlight of my confirmation, they confirmed the men and boys first, and then the women, and then the girls were last. Well, the first young girl who came to kneel in front of the bishop wet her pants all over the red carpet. And so when the rest of us came up, we had to kneel on the side of the bishop's chair because of this big wet spot. Well, we laughed for 6 months after that. And I guess we must have laughed her right out of the church because she became a Jehovah's Witness. But at any rate, I always said I was going to be reconfirmed until somebody said, "Oh, Barbara, the Holy Spirit works through gloves." But what was most empowering for me at that confirmation was the hymn that was sung as we were leaving in procession. And at 11 years old, the hymn just felt so empowering. It was, "Go forward, Christian soldier, beneath his banner true. The Lord himself thy leader shall all thy foes subdue. He knows thy trials, he knows thine hourly need. He will with bread of heaven thy fainting spirit feed." And that just made me stride forth and feel that I could do anything. I could do anything. But that was my confirmation. And I try, as a bishop, to make confirmation special for people so that they feel empowered. And I cannot sit and have people kneel in front of me for confirmation. So the confirmands kneel, but I stand. And I take each person's face in my hands, and I speak to them directly. I say something to them directly. If it's just to compliment a young man on his necktie. And I confirmed 54 people last October in a church, all places, Greenville, South Carolina. And a young man whose name was Sumner came and knelt, and I took his face in my hands, and I said, "Sumner, do you know we named a tunnel for you in Boston?" But confirmation is my favorite service to do.
As it is for everyone you've ever confirmed. So let's back up just a step, please, and talk about baptism, because I know that baptismal theology grounds you and your faith. Would you talk a little bit about that significance of baptism in your life and in your work, but also where is that baptismal theology the foundation for your inclusivity?
Well, I don't know that I can really speak to the theology of baptism, except that we are all, when I was baptized, the font was at the back of the nave. Sometimes now you find them in the front of the nave. But we're told that this is where we start, there at the back. And then as you grow in Christ from baptism, you come forward. And but we all start out, I believe, being empowered at baptism to live a faithful life. And baptism is special to me because the people, the godparents who pledged to see that I was raised in a life in Christ took that responsibility very seriously. And contributed to my growth in the faith and in the church. And it was my happy privilege to stand as a baptismal sponsor with my best friend when we were both 16 years old. And our other best friend, and the three of us will be 87 years old this year. We still take our vacations together. But two of us stood as baptismal sponsors for this third best friend, as I say, when we were all 16 years old. And for me, that meant living the faith into which I had been baptized and fulfilling my responsibility to bring others to Christ.
Thank you for that.
Now let's go back a little bit in time. Talk to us a bit. Susan alluded to a long and significant career in the public sector before you were ordained. Talk to us a little bit about that part of your life, and then how you came to Church of the Advocate.
Well, I spent several years in the field of public relations, and during that time, I continued to be an active layperson, and I had served as a church school teacher, choir member, the sponsor of the Young People's Fellowship, a member, the founder and member of the Young Adult Fellowship in my parish. Then my parish merged with a predominantly white congregation. And I was not comfortable after the merger because as a young person in the choir, every year during Lent, the choir from my black congregation went to sing a cantata at the white parish. And it was like we were there to entertain them. And after the merger, I was simply not comfortable. So one Sunday morning, I got up, I got in my car. I had no idea where I was going to church that day, but I knew if I didn't go to church that day, I probably wasn't going to go again if I hadn't found some place to go. I got in my car, I drove to the Church of the Advocate in the heart of North Philadelphia, in a predominantly black neighborhood, which was then labeled by the police department as the jungle. I did not know that the parish was on a summer schedule, and there were doors open at both sides of the front of the nave, and I did not know where the entrance door to the narthex was. And so I walked in. There was an altar there at the head of the nave. I walked in on the middle of the service, headed toward the altar. And a woman came out of her pew, put her arms around me, walked me to a pew, and I was wrapped in love in that parish from that day on. and her last name was Harris. She was Jean Harris. I didn't know her. And that was my embrace and welcome to the Church of the Advocate, where for 10 years I served as senior warden on the vestry, and where after service every Sunday, got into my car along with another woman parishioner and the rector, and we visited the House of Correction and Holmesburg Prison every Sunday afternoon. The rector went to the men, and Rosalie and I went to the women's wing of the House of Correction. We were part of a group from Episcopal Community Services that was known as the St. Dismas Fellowship in memory of the penitent thief. And we called ourselves the Dismal Damsels. But I found that, of course, most of the inmates, not only of the House of Correction, but at Holmesburg Prison for men, were black, and the volunteers, except for Rosalie and myself, were all white. The males were all white. And so once a month, I would go to Holmesburg Prison to visit the men. And that went well until one young man, as I was waiting at the gate to come off to be let out of the cell block where I met with him, one young man said to me, and there were about 28 to 30 guys there, and he said, "Could you give me a kiss? I haven't kissed a woman in a long time." I said, "Brother, I would love to kiss you, but I don't have enough pucker up for all these men here, so I will have to pass." But I was a prison visitor for years and years.
And those visits were on, was that Tuesday that I remember?
Well,
And 1 year?
well, as I was in my diaconate, a part of my field education was to do prison visiting, and I I formed a group of men who were over 40 years old, some of whom were in prison for the first time, and they were really afraid of younger inmates, some of whom they called jitterbugs. And we met on Thursday afternoons. And one year, Christmas Day came on Thursday. And at 2 o'clock, I showed up at the prison on Christmas Day, on Thursday. And I summoned my group. And the men said, "What are you doing here on Christmas Day?" I said, "It's Thursday, isn't it? We meet on Thursday." They said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, you're here and I'm here, so let's meet." But that was a strong part of my lay ministry and my diaconal ministry.
And some of you will know Church of the Advocate as the place where women were ordained irregularly, they called it.
Philadelphia.
42 years ago this summer, the Philadelphia 11, And Barbara was the crucifer for that service. So was that the first time you were in a church where guns were present, or no?
Yes, there were some guns present, but we had some female marshals at the service. I don't know where they came from, but they were some big, strong-looking women. And they were patrolling that church, ready to quell any disturbance that might have occurred. But as the senior warden, I was the crucifer that day, and it was decided that we would come from the sacristy and proceed to the start of the nave and then come across the front and have a short procession up to the altar. Well, when I walked out of that archway from the sacristy and saw that church full of what looked like a couple thousand people, I said I wanted to stride forth like Joshua 7 times around the walls of Jericho. But I accepted the discipline and came across the nave and did what I was supposed to do. But I wanted to march about in Zion that day. I truly did.
So how did Church of the Advocate get selected as the location for the Philadelphia 11 to be ordained? And why was it important for you personally to be part of that service? And did you have an inkling at that point that ordination was in your future? 3 questions in one, sorry.
Well, one, the folks planning the service were searching about for a place to have it. And no Episcopal church really wanted to have that irregular ordination service. It was a question of whether they could do it in a Presbyterian church or on Bishop Robert DeWitt's tennis court. And Paul Washington, my rector, offered the Church of the Advocate. But he first asked the congregation if they were willing to host that service. And the congregation readily agreed. And so the Church of the Advocate was offered, and it was a big church. And so it was decided that it would be held there. I was a part of the planning of the service, but I didn't really have that much input to the planning of the service. We did a lot of it in the living room of Suzanne Hyatt, who was one of the Philadelphia 11. And I spent a lot of time emptying ashtrays during the planning. And Bishop DeWitt said to me, "Stop acting like Martha." And I said, "Well, I can't be Mary." He said, "You never tried." I still didn't have any ideas about ordination. But a couple of years later, I began to discern that perhaps God was calling me to a different dimension of ministry. After my lay ministry, that perhaps I was being, Liz,
Yes.
I just realized that was you sitting there. I kept looking and I thought to myself, who is that? Oh, Liz, but I'm so glad to see you. I'm sorry. But I was,
Yes, we talked.
I thought, as I said, I began to discern that God was calling me to a different dimension of ministry. But I was steeped in this executive role in public relations for a major oil company at that time. And I thought I was the first woman manager of a department and the first woman and first black executive and manager for that oil company. And I thought, I cannot leave this job and go to seminary. I gotta figure out another way. Well, I worked out with my rector and another priest who attended my parish and who was a professor at, I can't think of the university there, but anyhow, one of the colleges in Philadelphia, and the education director for the diocese, how I could do an alternative program of study and retain my position with this oil company. And so I studied Old Testament and New Testament at Villanova University. I studied ethics at a collegiate center somewhere in the city. I went to Sheffield, England, and studied theology in a study house in Sheffield. I lived with a woman whose name was Mrs. Ledger, and I was known as Ledger's lodger. I studied church history someplace else. Well, I went to a variety of institutions while retaining this position. And finally, I took some time off and went to live at Episcopal Divinity School in Cambridge, Massachusetts, to integrate my independent study into the life of a seminary community. I had access to the library, I had access to the faculty, and I could audit any classes that I wished. And that's where I took the same general ordination examinations that any body had to take who wanted to be ordained. And out of 5 people, I had the second best papers in the Diocese of Pennsylvania. And so I was then ordained deacon, and a year later ordained a priest. But that was my path to ordination, a most unusual route to ordination, but that's how I did it.
And one of the first parishes you served, the stories there involve your mother again.
Well,
And I want to hear that story again, please.
I was sent to a small congregation that received financial aid from the diocese. And so the bishop could appoint the clergy first. And so I was sent there as deacon in charge. And the bulk of the congregation were widows and divorcees. My predecessor there was young, handsome, and gay. And they could work out their fantasies in a non-threatening way. And then I appeared. And what you see is what you get. So I spent my diaconate year there as deacon in charge, and then I was made priest in charge. But about 2 weeks after I got there, the organist quit. And my mother, who was a church organist and choir director, said, "I'll bail you out until you can find somebody." I was at that parish for 4 years. I left my mother there. Still playing the organ and directing the choir. She stayed there until she was 91 years old. And she said she was tired of going up to that choir loft and having to come down to receive communion and go back up the service. So she said, "I'm going back to my own parish where I can sit down." But one Sunday morning, the congregation sang a hymn so poorly. I went up to the pulpit. I said, "We're going to sing that hymn again, and we're going to sing it right this time." My mother yelled from the choir loft, "Well, it wasn't my choir." So after the service, I said, "Mom, don't ever do that to me again." She said, "Well, you were wrong." I said, "But look at this bulletin cover. It says Barbara C. Harris, priest in charge, not Beatrice P. Harris, organist in charge." She said, "You were still wrong." So that was the start of my ordained ministry. But during the course of my few years there, I got wind of the fact that these women were circulating a petition to ask the bishop to remove me because they were not happy with me. So I went to a vestry meeting and I said, "I understand there's a petition going around asking the bishop to remove me." I said, "Would somebody bring me the damn petition so I can sign it?" I didn't hear anything more about that petition until the following Sunday. I was at the church door after service to greet people. I looked out and there was this semicircle of men on the sidewalk, and one of them said, "Reverend Barbara, the men's fellowship didn't have anything to do with that petition." So I said, "Okay," and I never heard another word about that petition.
Thank you for indulging me with that story. The church musician in me loves that story about your mother. So let's switch gears again.
Mm-hmm.
You have met, in addition to being a remarkable person, you've met some rather remarkable people in the course of your life. Martin Luther King Jr., Desmond Tutu, our own Mary Glasspool, Pauli Murray, Howard Thurman. There are a whole list of folks. Are any of those names that you want to start with and tell us a story about your relationship?
Well, Pauli Murray, you know, who was an attorney, journalist, social worker, the first black woman ordained a priest. I didn't know her well, but I knew of her, had met her. But we attended some major service at the cathedral in Newark, New Jersey, Trinity Cathedral in Newark, New Jersey. And we were standing in the parish hall at a reception following the service. And Paulie Murray, who had done all these things and was about to be ordained, said to me, "Why aren't you in seminary?" And like the idiot I am, I said, "I'm too old." She said, "What?" Well, I got the longest lecture of my life standing in the middle of the parish hall at that cathedral in Newark as Paulie Murray dressed me down. And there you are. I heard Howard Thurman preach as a young woman, and I was just enchanted by his preaching. As for Desmond Tutu, who is Nell Gibson's good friend, I had occasion to meet him on several of his visits here, and then I had the good fortune to go to South Africa to preach at their provincial meeting. And by that time, Desmond Tutu had retired, but he still celebrated the Eucharist on Friday mornings at 7:30 a.m. in the cathedral in Cape Town, and then met with people for breakfast afterwards and conversation. So on my visit to Cape Town, following preaching at this provincial convocation, I got up and went to his 7:30 celebration of the Eucharist. And he was a good friend of Richard Branson, the owner of Virgin Atlantic Airways. And so I had first-class passage on Virgin Atlantic Airways to South Africa. And when I got to the Eucharist, Archbishop Tutu said to me, "How did you like Virgin Atlantic?" I said, "How do you think I got?" So, those were, and who else did you mention?
Oh, Martin Luther King Jr. You're
Well,
talking Selma, Montgomery,
I
and Bertram.
was a part of the Selma to Montgomery march, but not the whole. I can't take credit. I did not march the whole way from Selma to Montgomery. I flew from Philadelphia to Montgomery with a group of people on a flight that had been chartered by the AME Preachers Association in Philadelphia. And we caught up with the march near Montgomery at, I can't remember the name of the place where they stayed overnight, but anyhow, we did the last part of the march into Montgomery. And I can remember as the day wore on, it got warmer and warmer. And the women at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, Martin Luther King's church, filled big half-gallon mason jars with cold water. And we passed these mason jars from person to person on the street, and people were thoughtful enough to wipe the rim of the jar before passing it on to somebody else, much as we wipe the rim of the chalice before giving it to somebody else. And this rabbi standing there said, "We have just had Eucharist in the middle of Dexter Avenue." But one of the things I remember most about that march was women standing on the sidewalk, some with children and babies in their arms and toddlers by their side, just shouting profanity at the marchers, particularly at the Roman Catholic nuns who were participating, and accusing them of having slept with black men who were marching in that march. And I have to tell you this funny story. I had dyed my hair a little before I went on this march. And I thought it was going to be like coffee color, but it came out some kind of garish, almost orange. And I got off the plane in Montgomery, and two good old boys were lounging against the wall in the airport. And I walked by, and one of them looked at me and said, "My God, here come a redhead nigger." That was my greeting to the Selma to Montgomery.
And out of those experiences, you have become a voice for prophetic witness and inclusion of all sorts across the church. Can you talk to us a little bit about the other stands that you've taken for welcoming and inclusion in the years since those?
Well, I would say that I am a firm believer that we all gather under the broad umbrella of Christ. And that includes, as we pray, all kinds and conditions of people. And so I have advocated for the inclusion of all kinds of people and urge us all to embrace all kinds and conditions of people. And I was telling Susan a story. I have attended 18 consecutive general conventions of the church. And at one, I was a lay deputy from the Diocese of Pennsylvania. And this was way back. Somebody got up and offered a resolution that said, the Episcopal Church does not believe in the ordination of gay and lesbian people. And I got up in the House of Deputies. And the president of the House of Deputies said, "For what purpose does the deputy at microphone 9 rise?" And I said, "I rise to amend the resolution to say that the Episcopal Church no longer believes in the ordination of gays, since we've been ordaining them since the 13th century. So that we will not be the laughing stock of the Anglican world." And a gasp went down the center of the House of Deputies. And somebody said, "I don't believe she said that." And R.J. Walker, who became the Bishop of Long Island, said, "I know her, she said it." So, I guess that's some of the basis for my philosophy of inclusion and outreach to all of God's people.
Thank you for that. Two folks that I want to add to the list of people I want to ask you about. First of all, our own Mary Glasspool, one of our bishops here in New York, who couldn't be here and sends her love and her greetings. And you were just a few weeks ago in Indianapolis, the Diocese of Indianapolis, for Jennifer Baskerville-Burroughs. Can you tell us those stories, please?
But Mary Glasspool was a rector in Massachusetts many years ago. And in 1988, on behalf of some women in the Diocese of Massachusetts, Mary Glasspool said to me, "Can we put your name in the election process for suffragan bishop of Massachusetts?" And I said, "Well, let me go pray about it." And then almost the time for the nominations to close, I called her back and said, "Okay, they might as well consider my name, but nothing's going to come of it." So my name went into the process, and lo and behold, I became a nominee. And all through that process leading up to the election, I thought to myself, well, they can consider it, but, you know. Then we had the walkabouts, which at that point were called the Dog and Pony Show. And, you know, you met with groups of people who were going to vote in the electing convention. And I went to those walkabouts for a couple of nights, and I thought to myself, I am never going to see these people again in life, and so I can say exactly what's on my mind. And I did. And look what it got me. But Mary Glasspool gave the nominating speech for me at the electing convention. And I don't know whether she's ever regretted it. At any rate, it was my happy privilege to read the consents of the bishops to her election at her consecration in the Diocese of Los Angeles.
And Jennifer, just a few weeks ago.
Jennifer Baskerville-Burroughs, her consecration was just a beautiful, moving, magnificent service attended by about 1,500 and 1,600 people. And what was particularly heartwarming to me was to see the gathering of black women clergy from all over the country who came together to be a part of that celebration. And I knew Jennifer was a brilliant young woman, but I never thought she could be elected bishop in the Diocese of Indianapolis. I was telling someone earlier that the first time I visited Indianapolis in the mid-1950s, it was known as the Georgia of the North. It had a very strong membership of the Ku Klux Klan there. I stayed at a major hotel in downtown Indianapolis. The manager of the hotel called me and said, "Miss Harris, we would appreciate it if you would not embarrass us by demanding service in the dining room. If you would be like all the rest of the important people and take your meals in your room, we would be very grateful." So it surprised me that she was elected in the Diocese of Indianapolis. But I think she will make an excellent, outstanding bishop. And in fact, a woman priest in my diocese said to me the other day that she had had occasion to speak to Jennifer on the phone and that she was living into her position and enjoying it. And I said to Jennifer the night before her service of consecration, I said, "Jennifer, you are not Jesus, and you do not have to tread this wine press alone. If you need help, ask for it." But it was a thrilling, wonderful service, joyful, good preaching, and it was a pleasure to be a part of it. I was a co-consecrator, and that was an honor for me. And I think everybody there was just elated to be there. And Jennifer herself cried through the whole service. And she was crying in procession coming in. God was really present.
On one hand, it was a historic occasion because it's the first time a woman bishop has handed a crozier to the next woman bishop.
That's right.
On the other hand, this was the first black woman diocesan
Diocesan bishop. Yeah, she's the first black woman to serve as a diocesan bishop.
And when you were consecrated, did you think it would take that long? Are you surprised at the lag in time?
Well, yes, I had thought maybe before now we might have had a black woman as a diocesan bishop, but I'm not really surprised. Because it takes this church a long time to get anything right. But I'm just so glad that it happened and that Jennifer was the person chosen because I think she will make an excellent diocesan bishop. It has taken a while, but thank God it has happened. Mhm.
So one last comment, more than question, to which I want to ask your response before I hand the microphone around. You are famous both for your pastoral heart and for your prophetic vision. And I would ask what you have to say to us as a church, as individuals, in such a time as this. What do you see us being called to? And what would you send us forth in vision?
I would urge us all in this time of some civil, I don't want to say unrest, but uncertainty, to remember who and whose we are, and that everybody belongs to God. And I would urge us to remember and act upon our sense of inclusion. And as I said earlier, to not only in church but in our communities, to reach out and to struggle for the inclusion of all of God's people. In the life of the church and of the community. There are no outcasts.
There are no outcasts. I suspect there are some questions or some comments or some hellos from people who has something to ask.
No, I'm just going to offer them.
Okay, great. That's good too.
Hi, my name is Santana.
Yes.
I work with children in the church, and one of my goals is to help to create the space where they can reimagine what God or who God is in their lives. And because children are great visual learners, what God looks like. But I find it, if I allow it to be frustrating, with their defense of the Eurocentric God and in their defense of a white Jesus. So I guess my question is how, if there's any guidance in creating this space where, for me, I think God is most powerful when I can see her in everything that is around me, in nature and in air and in people, in all people. And so I want to be able to create this space for the children who are from like 5 to 7th grade, so it's a big range, of being able to see God as more than just a white man in the clouds like is up there, but can be reflected in themselves and can be in everyone. So if there's guidance in being able to facilitate that conversation in a more meaningful way that is inclusive and encompasses all of what God can be.
I would say, if I were trying to interact with young people of that age at this point, I would say, picture God as your Father, and let them have a vision of God as their Father, how you picture your Father? And because God is Father to all of us, so God looks like Father to all of us. And if you have to picture God as your Father. What would you want your Father to look like?
Another question?
Bishop, I've been black almost as long as you. I think you've got like 3 years or 4 years on me. And that 3? Yeah, 3 years. 3 years on me. And I remember growing up in the Black Episcopal Church in Detroit. And Malcolm G. Dade is the only reason, a black priest, that I'm still in the church. Because, well, you said confirmation at 12 when we were all being confirmed. I refused. And my priest went along with it. I said it was not worth a few presents, I told all the other kids, to stand and say something that I wasn't sure of and that I didn't see happening. And my priest went along with it. Because in Detroit, the church was very segregated. And I wasn't sure I wanted to be even a part of that church. And it wasn't until 6 or 7 years later that I finally stood before a bishop. And I was confirmed. But I can remember, but it was interesting because my priest then put me in charge of the confirmation class. Because he felt that I believed. And the work, and when all of my friends left the Episcopal Church during the Civil Rights Movement, I stayed simply because of him.
Thank you.
So what is the hardest thing that God has ever called you to do?
My God. I don't know. I guess one of the hardest things that God has called me to do was to not be angry at the people who opposed my election and consecration as bishop. And a lot of people in the church did oppose it. I had some death threats. I had to have my telephone number changed twice. Once, then I had to have it unlisted. Some of the nastiest hate mail, as I said, came from church people, and you will not believe some of the stuff that was sent to me. And to keep my perspective and not be angry and to remember that God is still on the throne. I was offered a bulletproof vest to wear to my consecration, and I declined to wear it. I said, if some fool is going to shoot me, what better place to die than at an altar? So, keeping my perspective and not, getting blown away by people who oppose me is one of the hardest things that I've had to do in my life. And to remember that I had a lot of support from people who didn't even know me that well, but believed that it was right for me to hold this office, be consecrated to this office. And so I'm grateful for that.
Thank you.
Hi, I have a question. You spoke about you were public relations for the oil company. First, you must have been really good, because since you left, the reputation has just gone right down the toilet. But you said you had the sense that God was calling you. What was that like for you? What was he saying? And what did you feel he was urging you to do?
To expand the dimension of ministry in which I was engaged. Not that what I was doing as a lay person was not satisfying and important enough, but I felt a call to a broader or wider dimension of ministry. That included doing things as an ordained person. And one of my biggest opponents in this was my mother, who did not believe in ordination of women, until she walked into that church and saw it full of her friends who had come to support my ordination as a deacon. There you are.
Bishop, how do you keep going? Are there spiritual disciplines? Are there activities in your daily life that keep you? I mean, a lot of people would be stopping, but I know that you've been different places every weekend, and you're preaching, and you're being called upon. What nurtures your soul?
The gospel nurtures my soul and makes me feel like the Energizer Bunny. So that's how I keep going. Sometimes I need to slow down, but God gives me the strength to keep on doing whatever I can do. And I enjoy it. I love preaching. I love being with people and doing what I can with people. So, it's great.
Yeah. Well, if you want to hear him preach tomorrow, you're going to have to go to Nyack. And Bishop, maybe you could say a prayer for us now. And I think there's food set out, and I suspect a lot of people have questions they may want to ask you personally. We can spend more time, unless there's any last question that's burning that someone wants to ask. Maybe you would pray for us, and then we can have some more fellowship.
Gracious and loving God, we give you thanks for this time together, for the opportunity to gather on many occasions to be the beloved community. We ask that we may continue to gather in fellowship and to reach out to others, to embrace them into our fellowship. And now we ask that the God of Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar, and of Jesus Christ, born of our sister Mary, and of the Holy Spirit, who embraces the church as a mother surrounds her children, remain and abide with you this day and forevermore. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for being